What is up, guys? You all know the familiar theme tune. This is, of course, the Sound of the Carrot Poker podcast, and we are back with episode 87. Today, the topic is what everyone's talking about. It's everybody's topic. Every single podcaster I've ever seen or heard of appears to have done a segment on this huge spectacle recently. Is, of course, going to be about the D-Negs versus Doug Polk Heads Up Challenge, which is about, I don't know, 2,000 hands in right now as we record this. I've got my friend and student with me. Shaun is with us today. How's it going, man? Welcome.
Hey, it's fine. You?
Doing pretty well, thank you. It's actually dark at 4:30, which is like really, really upsetting. It's pitch black here in the UK, so sad times, but I'm doing well.
Yeah, it's similar here.
You're in Belgium, right?
Yeah, just an hour difference. So
nice. So I basically put out in my Discord group, my student Discord group, earlier today, an ad for podcast guests and to suggest a topic, Shaun, and you suggested this topic, which was definitely something I wanted to cover anyway. We are bringing back the podcast now. We've got various students lined up to come on the show. We may even get D-Negs on the show or Polk on the show at some point. Who knows how big this thing could get? Let's reach for the stars here. So why did you suggest this topic? Like, why does this spectacle, why has it captured your interest in a major way?
I always like these big challenges, like the Phil Galfond one where he's doing the PLO, like when he was down 900,000 and then managed to bring it back, or back in the days with the Tom DeLon heads up challenges. Like stuff like this are really exciting. They really, like, the entire poker community has its eyes on it. And it's really interesting to watch as well, to see how these giants, actually really good players, are playing against each other. Like egos clashing maybe a little bit. But like, yeah, it's really exciting to watch.
Yeah, I think it brings people together as well, doesn't it? It's like this whole, we all have something common ground that we can talk about right now. That's not COVID, that's not doom and gloom, that's like something exciting. And this is definitely that. So you probably know a bit more about the challenge than I did. I have to be honest, when the challenge first came out, I remember saying to a few friends, I was like, I'm going to be watching this every night. I'm going to be there with the popcorn, I'm never going to have my eyes off the screen. And then, I don't know, I think like one of the things was that the hole cards were down, right? Like that made it harder to stay focused on. Like I remember when I first started watching the battle, I was like looking at the screen like, okay, this is taking like 95% of my energy at 10 p.m. or 11 p.m. UK time or whatever to actually follow the action. How have you found it, like with hole cards being down and stuff?
Yeah, it's definitely different than like high stakes poker, where like the series high stakes poker, where you could just watch and have it in like on in the background, and you could hear the commentators talking about a specific hand. You really need to be focused. Obviously, it's not in my time zone either, so I always have to watch it the day after. And it does take concentration. The first 200 hands were played live, and it was a bit more interesting to see actual hole cards. But like without them, I think it is interesting because it forces you to think more about ranges. More like, okay, he could have these type of hands and do it with this. I think as a training tool, it's actually a bit more exciting to not see the hole cards. Obviously, not being able to see him afterwards is actually detrimental to that.
Yeah.
But it's really interesting that way. I do think a lot of viewers are gonna stop watching because of it, because of not seeing hole cards. They really want to see people clash, right? Mm-hmm. I don't know if on GG Poker it's actually possible to be released later on, but it might.
That would be awesome. I mean, I would love to see this like cards up kind of coverage. I mean, we got used to that in the Galfond challenge, which was PLO. In PLO though, I find there's a lot more, like single race pots with action that go to showdown. I just feel like there's a lot more showdowns. I think in No Limit Hold'em there's like these long stretches of just like guy 3 bets, guy folds, guy 4 bets, guy folds, C bet on the flop, fold, barrel on the turn, fold. So it's kind of hard to stay focused, if you will, because the showdowns are so few and far between. And the other thing would be that at showdown, you probably noticed this, you don't always see both hands, right? So the losing hand's going to muck the majority of the time, I think. At least Polk seems to always muck. And then you don't even see what he had, and the commentators are kind of speculating. So I remember finding it a little bit disappointingly unwatchable. Not that it's unwatchable, but it's hard to focus on it. It was more something I had on in the background. But I have checked out recently, and now Joey Ingram, the great poker podcaster, appears to be back in action after a little hiatus, as we do as podcasters. We're always dropping off the face of the earth for unexplained amounts of time and then crawling back out. But he and Landon Tice, I believe his name is, like kind of very young kid that started playing like high stakes and is doing really well for himself. They are now covering the DNegs Heads Up Polk Challenge in a more watchable way, you would say.
Yeah, it's definitely more watchable because the commentators previously, it's viewable on GG Poker, Upswing Poker Stream, I think also on the YouTube, and now on Joe Ingram. And the thing is that the other two sites, like they're not always covering the action. Like I think there was one with Ryan Fee and another Run It Once coach, and they were just talking about live and things going on, but not about the action itself. While with Joe Ingram and then Landon Tice, I think it's just Joe Ingram that sometimes he has a guest, sometimes he's alone. I think it was Landon Tice twice and then alone once and then one time with someone else. He has these sound effects going on already. It's way more exciting to watch. He tries to hype it up a little bit. He talks about the action. Obviously, he's not a no-limit hold'em player. He's more PLO. But that doesn't mean he doesn't understand a lot of things. And like the Landon Tice actually was really, with the two sessions with Landon Tice was really focused on like range work and how Doug or DNegs range interact on these boards and how they should be playing. And really good, solid commentary about it.
Yeah, so that definitely makes it more watchable. Also, shout out to Joey Ingram, obviously one of the best entertainers in the poker industry these days, at least in the online poker industry, and he tends to do commentary as well. So like if you guys are looking to check it out, I would recommend Ingram because while I've heard like Fee and other people, I think Fee's an upswing coach, not Run It Once, just to like clarify that. But I think I could be wrong. I think he is. But just the thing about Ingram is that he'll actually be like, you know, DNegs opens the button, Polk 3-bets the big blind, flop comes this, you know, Polk checks, and he'll give the commentary action by action in the middle of a hand. He'll sort of recap the hand as the hand is going on, and that is super useful because it means you don't have to be staring at like both tables trying to be like, right, I've logged the action here, I've logged the action there. Also, something you said about the use of this as a training exercise, I have to admit, I'd never really thought about sitting there and trying to study by watching this. I just see it as like trash TV, like you would watch, like I'd never watch Celebrity Love Island, right? Like obviously, but you know, something like that where it's just for the sheer drama of it. But that's interesting, like actually trying to learn about it as well. Yeah, so what are your impressions, Shaun, of the match so far? Like how has it gone relative to your expectations about how it would go? Has anything surprised you so far? Just before we get into the mega strategy, just anything in a really general sense that surprised you?
Well, it's a bit surprising how DNegs is actually holding his own for now. It's only 2,000 hands, obviously, but I would expect him to actually be down lower. And he's improving time after time. Obviously, he has like a few coaches. I think he has multiple that work with him on this. So they probably have devised a strategy that DNegs can apply, because obviously if you haven't played Heads Up a lot, but do have a solid poker background, it's not that easy. It's way easier to migrate from Heads Up to 6max than from 6x to Heads Up, just because ranges become so much wider and it's way different. But if you understand poker theory in a high concept like Heads Up, you can obviously migrate to 6max a bit more easily. So I'm surprised DNegs, especially not being a cash game player, like more like a tournament player, it's holding its own so far.
What do you think about DNegs? I mean, I don't want to like throw you under the bus here and make you, you know, give a complete attitude towards the guy, but like as a poker player, right? What do you think about someone who spends most of their time playing big tournaments, having their entrance fees paid for them, never really... The thing that bothers me about tournament players is it's like, Daniel Negreanu has over 90 billion pounds in winnings, right? Or something like that. I exaggerate, probably.
Yeah, so with tournament players in general, my main issue is that the way it's reported, like being the better tournament player is like lifetime winnings, but it doesn't actually mean anything.
Right.
Because you have to calculate in how much you lose. Like, let's just say WSOP bracelets, like Daniel has 6 and Doc has 3, but did Daniel play twice as much WSOP events than Doc, or did he play way more? Like, if he played way more than Doc, in theory, is like a better at tournaments, because he, on average, he won more WSOP bracelets per tournament. Like it should be like a return on investment. Yep. Like online, you obviously don't say, well, this is my lifetime winnings. You say, this is my return on investment.
Yep.
And for some reason in live, it's totally different.
And also because like players are sponsored, right? So DNeggs these days, he was once an ambassador for PokerStars. That obviously got him lots of discounted or free entries, I would imagine. Don't quote me on it, to lots of tournaments. Now GG Poker, I'd imagine, are doing, you know, the same thing to some extent. So it's also like, how much of your own capital, when you're really famous like that, do you actually have to put up? And do you really go through the same struggles and challenges that all other poker players go through, putting their own bankroll on the line? Is it somewhat of a celebrity free roll for Daniel Negreanu? Has he had, you know, just a silver spoon kind of poker career recently based on that? And what's that done to his game? Has he been able to stay as sharp? Also, who have his opponents been? They've generally been weak players. I mean, there's a lot of strong players he's played with as well, but when you're playing WSOP events, you're playing in gigantic fields with lots of fish, right? The WSOP attracts far more weaker players, far more recreationals than any other 10k buy-in event would do. So we like going into this, I have to say, I was extremely skeptical of DNeg's ability as a poker player. I was extremely skeptical about his ability to remain at the top of the game and to actually, you know, be able to compete anymore at all at high level. And I thought that Polk would absolutely annihilate him, and maybe he still will, but I have to say, from what little I've seen, I was surprised like you at just how well DNeggs is kind of holding his own. He's not, I don't think he's making lots of colossal errors left, right and centre. There's a few things he's done that I think are a bit questionable that we'll get to in a minute, but yeah, I have not felt like this has been a top brag against a whale or anything like that. I've not felt as if he's a gigantic 9-1 or 10-1 underdog or anything like that. We'll go into the variant side of it in a second. But yeah, I've been surprised like you at just how well he's held his own. What do you think about that? Do you think that he's put in a ton of work recently, like worked with a lot of coaches and just got a lot better? Or do you think that he's always been at the top of the game this whole time, despite the game moving forward and the solver boom in the GTO era and all of that?
Well, I think first of all, with like the buy-ins of tournaments, like being split, like being sponsored and stuff like that, it doesn't really make much of a difference, except that obviously you're less stressed. Like the cash makes much of less of an impact on you, and people do that anyway, right? They sell direction,
right?
So it's very common. Obviously, DNeggs, given that he's already famous, can do that a bit more, especially through sponsorship. But I don't think it makes him like less of a player. He still has to put up the results. But obviously, live tournaments, being more fish infested or recreationals, I think it's more like being a decent player and being consistent in that field makes it so that you're pretty good at adapting your game. So I think DNeggs, given that he also plays other type of games, not only No Limit Hold'em obviously, but he is also like I don't know, Raz and stuff like that. He plays, right? And that actually shows like his overall strength. He can actually adapt pretty well. And I think that's what's going on here. I was a bit surprised, like after the heads up challenge and it started, DNeggs was playing tournaments because the WSOP was online in these times, obviously. And he was playing tournaments and Doc was already, you know, studying. So I was like, well, how is DNeggs ever going to catch up? A dog already has this massive advantage over his years of experience, and then suddenly DNeggs comes in and it's like, well, I'm going to do this, but first I'm going to play 2 months of tournaments, which is totally weird. But I do think like his coaches really helped him, like finding a strategy. I think he's currently using like a 2-side strategy only, and he actually knows how to apply it a little bit. But I think it's not that easy to do against Dog because Dog is like more the GTO type player, right? He's gonna have the bluffs where he's gonna need the bluffs, and I think they just give a lot of respect to each other, and DNeggs gives a lot of respect to Dog, like having the bluffs, so he has to call down some hands, knowing that Dog has the capability of bluffing in some spots. But I think like just the overall adaptability of DNeggs is somehow helping him here.
That's interesting, because my thought going into this was it doesn't matter how good at adjusting and how reactive Daniel is, and I agree that that's definitely his strength. Like I think he's the kind of player that can sit there next to a fish, you know, be nice and friendly, throw some digs, here and there, and get a feel for what that player is probably doing wrong, and then like take full advantage. Like if you put D-Negs in like a WSOP final table with 3 fish and put Polk in there, I have no question that D-Negs would probably have higher EV against the weaker players in that spot. However, I remember thinking, how can you be reactive and be adaptive against somebody who's so solidly GTO based? Like, can, or could, maybe is a better way to put it, hypothetically, could Doug Polk just sit behind the veil of GTO, of solidity, and just wait for Daniel to make mistakes and then not even really react? Like, not get lost in this war of exploitability, this war of like, if he does this, I do this. Why not sit back? Why not stay in your fortress and let D-Negs just kill himself with error after error of not knowing GTO properly? What do you think?
I actually think that's what Doc is doing, but it's high variance, right? If you have to have the bluffs in certain spots, and he has them, and he has to have the value hands as well. Obviously, when your opponent then bluff catches, it sucks if you have the bluff, because then that's going to be quite a big hit. And 2,000 hands isn't a big sample, right? When we look at online sample sizes and someone comes to us with 100k, and we're just saying, well, come back when you have 1 million, right? So 2,000 hands doesn't really mean anything. But I do think like Daniel's adaptability, because you need to know like the baseline somewhat before you can adapt. But like against the GTO player or against a player that's like playing this balanced strategy, there's no way you can adapt in a profitable way, because that's the definition of GTO anyway.
Right. Exactly.
So I just think it takes time, and when we go further into the challenge, we should see that variance even out a little bit, and then Doc winning. Like for me, I think Doc Polk should win this.
Yeah, I think he's a fairly big favourite as well. I'm not as sure anymore that he's as big a favourite as he was. One point, though, is that in heads up, like, I think people need to understand that variance is not actually going to be as extreme over 100,000 hands as it would be in 6 max, purely because 100,000 hands is a very long time in heads up. You're involved in every single hand. You make a decision that's relevant in every single hand, even if that's just 3-betting queens or failing to if you're Daniel, little dig there, or even if it's not opening 8-3 off on the button, you're still making a decision. Whereas in 6 max or full ring, you're sitting there just making routine folds for 30 hands in a row sometimes and stuff like that. So I think like if they were to play 100,000 hands, there like variance would be almost eliminated. That's not the same for online 6 max zoom or something like that. But I think 20k hands, 25k hands, beg your pardon, is also a very big sample in heads up. I think 25k hands should sort the men from the boys the vast majority of the time, and I think you can do some simulation in something like Prime Dope for that. But I think the bigger thing is that right now nobody has been completely crushed. Like nobody has been down. Like you said, Phil Galfond style, 20, 30 buy-ins in the red, needing to claw your way back. Like that point of desperation where even the great Phil Galfond, one of my idols, admitted that his game was beginning to crumble against Veni Vidi when he was down that much and he had to take a break. What happens to Daniel Negreanu's game? We've already seen in recent times that Daniel has been a little bit volatile in the public eye. He's been criticised for maybe snapping, not having the best composure at times of late. Is it fair to say that if D-Negs was to take a significant hit and be down 6, 7, 800k, that his game might crumble to the point where Dog's Edge would just become unfathomably great?
Oh, that's definitely a possibility. I think after the first online session, Dog was up and people were already speculating that D-Negs was, at a certain point tilting. Obviously, you need to be able to mentally reset. Given that he's a tournament player, he should be more capable of that, because in every tournament you just take these beats. But as you said, history recently has shown that he's not that great at it. We obviously don't know if it's like something going on in his life or if it's like just for the show, right? Some people have a personality on streams that they do. We don't know, but like it's entirely possible that he's more tilt prone than we think. And if that's the case and Doc is up like 200,000, it doesn't even need to be that much, but like 5 buy-ins, it might be that his game starts to crumble, or that he just like defaults to his standard, which is what the coaches have taught him, and but he can't really think about it. But then the question obviously is Doc going to be able to exploit that, or is he still going to be playing his GTO style?
It may not matter if Daniel's old standard game is so hole-ridden that Doug can actually just sit back and gain even more of an edge. He may not even have to get mixed up in that war of he thinks, I think, he thinks, you know. So I think it's an interesting hypothetical if Daniel is going to get hurt, you know, in this challenge and be down 10 to 15 buy-ins, and his ego and his pride and his security takes a hit like that. Does he revert back to some prior game? Because as a coach, you know, I've often witnessed students regress back to their most natural and critical leaks in times of duress. So when a student is going through like a bad downswing, that's when he's going to start doing things he did 2 years ago that were normal for him then, that he's since ironed out of his game. Just much like if you got hurt really badly in life, you might like curl up into a ball and start crying. It's a similar thing, right? We have our poker ball or poker infancy that we revert back to. And I think it's very possible that happens if DNX gets hurt and then he starts checking even more turns, blah, blah, blah. So I'd say that in terms of psychological warfare here, I think Doug is far more likely to be able to survive a big downswing and a bad string of multiple sessions. You already saw him do that. Doug has been the one who's been on the worst downswing so far, and he's kind of come back. He lost like 3 sessions or 4 sessions in a row. I believe this is the 23rd of November, by the way, guys. So just to give you a clue, we're about 2k hands in. So yeah, just to summarize my point here, I think like Daniel's going to have to be careful because, you know, Doug's already survived like one sort of downswing. Daniel's yet to be really put to the sword in terms of variance like that, and strings of bad sessions. And yeah, I could see his tournament game being a disadvantage. I could see the fact that you get to reset in tournaments being pretty bad for him because he will be keeping score. No matter what, you have to keep score in a heads-up match where you want to finish in the green and in the black. And so I could actually see Doug being more versed in the ways of dealing with heads-up variance because he's you know, battled at heads-up 2 weeks into a horrific 30-40 buy-in downswing. He's been there. Daniel hasn't. Daniel's had the opportunity to reset after every tournament and come in fresh-faced and smiling the next day. Like, hey, everybody, what's up? I'm down in Negreanu the next day. It's fine. He can do that. Doug has had to sit on his own at his computer and fire up sessions while stuck that month for 30 or 40 heads up buy-ins or 50 buy-ins or something. So if you ask me who's going to crumble if they get put to the sword of bad variance, it's 100% DNX, and I think that can easily increase Doug's EV. However, there's another point here. Is this a free roll for Daniel? Is this a win-win and that the publicity he gets from this as the underdog is going to pay for what he loses? Is he going to make back more money on this challenge regardless of what happens? And is he in a position where he can just absolutely crush the poker world if he wins publicity-wise, and even if he loses, he's still generated enough good stuff for himself? What do you think about that? Why is he taking this challenge in the first place?
Well, why he took up the challenge, no one actually knows, right? So, some people think like it's ego or like he's taking steroids or something for his fitness. Like no one knows why he actually took this up. Yeah. Because taking up the challenge, Doug actually said, let's play heads up and play a game of your choice, right? Yeah. Because DNX isn't specialized in heads up, Doug is, so they wanted to play like Doug was fair and said like, well, let's play 2 types of games, one's of my choice, one's of yours, and DNX just said, well, let's play heads up, right? Mm-hmm. So it's a bit confusing there. Why didn't he take like the second option? But then I do think it's somewhat of a win-win for DNX. Obviously, when he wins, it's like amazing. Obviously, outside of the money that he gets from winning, but also like his credibility as a poker player, because DNX is seen as the underdog. I think BetSides has it as well, like 4-1 and stuff like that, right? So if he wins, it's like the underdog story. Getting there, he beat like the guy that's famous for beating Ben Solsky, South 123, in heads up, like the heads up king back in the day. And now DNX beats him. So that's obviously a clear win for DNX. And then when he loses, he obviously loses money outside of that. But like everyone expected him to lose. It's not going to take anything away from his credibility. Like people who believe that DNX was good are still going to believe that DNX is good, because they're just going to say, well, it's heads up and he, you know, Daniel is a tournament player. It doesn't really fit into his style anyway. He was supposed to lose, blah, 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 blah. Then there's the monetary value. We don't actually know if GG is like, or GG Poker is sponsoring him in some way, or if he's backed by someone, or Maybe he even has like hidden bets on Polk winning, and then when Polk wins, he actually gets money or something. I don't know.
Interesting.
Yeah, I don't actually know if you can do that. Like it has to be illegal, right?
I have no
Betting
idea.
on your opponent.
I mean,
I don't know.
it's certainly fine in, the US election to, when the odds are fluctuating absolutely crazy and you're betting on Trump, and then you basically cover yourself with a huge bet on Biden when he swings to being the massive underdog. Like, it's super possible there against the bookies who are impartial. But when you are one of the participants in the match, I would imagine that betting against yourself is at best highly unethical and at worst, like, I don't know, illegal or criminal in some sense. The question is, though, right, there's no global authority on what bets are illegal to make and what bets aren't, so it's kind of up to the bookie to decide that. And if some bookie or person wants to buy a bunch of DNEGs, or wants to, obviously that's more normal, or wants to offer him bets, what is the difference? Is there really a huge difference between selling a massive part of yourself to somebody and placing a bet with a bookie on the other guy to win? I don't know. I think it's all a majorly blurry thing. But regardless of that, it doesn't take away from the fact that he's still going to try his very best to win, and so is Polk. Like, who knows what degree of insurance each of them has, how much it's really going to hurt them. I'd imagine that each of them is insured enough here, or is covered enough here, that they're not losing any part of their bankroll that would be really painful for them to lose, or maybe they have so much money that it doesn't matter. But yeah, I doubt that either of them is that worried about financial ruin from this challenge. That would be really fun if they were. I'd love to see heads up for, net worth, and you end up having to sell your house and become homeless, and, your life is over if you lose. That would be entertaining. That'd be a really fun battle.
So like the classic heads up for rolls meme,
yeah,
right?
Heads up for life. Maybe even they like get, I don't know, locked up in prison if they lose, or something like that. Just raise the stakes here. Let's have these guys actually really suffer. Let's have somebody have a breakdown and, beg the other guy for mercy at the end of the challenge when he's lost the bet and has to go to prison for 5 years. Let's make it interesting. Jokes aside, what happens? There's obviously this 12.5k bailout option, so either player, it's within their rights to quit at that point and admit defeat in the challenge instead of playing the other 12.5k hands. We all thought that we still think, probably largely as a community, that if DNEGs is down significantly at 12.5k and it's looking unlikely that he can restore the balance, then it would be the right thing to do. It would be plus EV and sensible and, normal for him to throw in the towel. No ego loss really involved. It's just a plus EV thing to do. So we're kind of expecting that to happen, I guess, if DNEGs is getting crushed, right? Are we? We're expecting him to throw in the towel.
Yeah, so it's only the losing player at 12,500 hands that can choose it.
Sorry,
so not the winning player.
Yeah.
But it's expected. Like, I think most people were like, well, DNX is going to lose, and at 12,500 hands, he's going to say, well, I give up, right? He's just going to get crushed. And if that happens, like, I think it's expected. So we're not really going to be surprised about it. No one's going to be like, oh, DNX, why didn't you play another 12,500 hands? I mean, it's already credible that he, or at least noteworthy that he took up this challenge. Like, I definitely, if I were him, would not have accepted this. But then the question remains, what is Paul going to do? Let's say he's down and he can't really see a way to crawl back. Is he actually going to do this? Because that would be a big hit to his credibility.
Yeah.
I think that's why for Daniel it's more like win-win, and for Doug, like, the losing part is going to be harder. He also has like this upswing poker website where he trains. Like, he sells like his heads up course against Belsolski, obviously. So obviously when he loses here, how credible is that still, right? Is he going to lose customers because of that? It's going to be ridiculed. He already actually quit poker, or at least he said so, for like 2 years or something, and this brought him back. But I don't think he's gonna bail. I think he's, like, as you said earlier, he's more like mentally capable of considering to be variants, just looking at things, saying, well, I'm still playing well, I can win some spots here and there, and he's just gonna play on. As you said, he has been down as well. When he took up this challenge and started playing nosebleeds again at Heads Up online, he was losing. He posted his graphs on Twitter and he was like, well, I'm getting crushed here, and he's just taking it as a learning experience.
Yeah.
I think the same is true here. Like, he he's mentally capable because he's been there, and he won't bail out. I don't see him like bailing out at 12,500 heads. Even if it's like half a million down, or like maybe even a million, doesn't even matter the number. He's still gonna see like the next 12,500 hands as plus EV. Yep. Like even if he just makes back 200,000 in that case, it's still gonna be more of a profit than such a big loss, right?
Yep.
So I don't think he's ever gonna bail out. I don't know what your opinion about that is.
I mean, first thing I'd say is at 200, 400, like even if someone's down a million, like they're still down like just over 20 buy-ins. They're not down very much at all in the terms of heads up, and it's very conceivable that you can go on a 30 buy-in upswing in 5k hands and heads up. It happens all the time. You know, we saw what happened with Phil Galfond. Okay, it's a slightly swingier game, but heads up NL, very, very possible. Standard deviations can be 120, 150, something around there pretty easily in heads up no limits. So it's a very swingy game. That said, you are involved in every hand, so like 25k hands is a bigger sample there than it is in 6 max, but the variance per hand that you're involved in is bigger and heads up. So I think like even if Polk is down, let's say 20, 30, 40 buy-ins, he won't see this match as lost. I think for this match to be lost, especially for Polk, the favourite, who presumably still has a skill edge when down, he's going to have to go on an absolutely abhorrent run. Like he's going to have to lose 50, 60 buy-ins before that even becomes highly unlikely that he can make a comeback. I have no idea if he would quit. I don't see why he would. It seems really minus EV. It seems like even if he was suffering, it would still be like massively in his best interests for many of the reasons that you mentioned, you know, vis-a-vis the business and upswing and everything like that in his course, just to keep going, like to actually throw in the towel and, you know, like submit to Daniel Negreanu after 12,500 hands. I think that would be viewed as pathetic by a lot of people in the community, rightly or wrongly. I'm not saying that we should view him as pathetic for that. He may have legitimate reasons for quitting, but it's very likely that he would be mocked, ridiculed, and DNegs would just, I don't know. I can just see the smile on DNegs' face, and if I were Polk, I would not be willing to let that smile happen. I can't deal with that. So I don't think so. I agree with you. I think he's going to keep going, come what may.
I actually wonder who put this in, right? Because these are like stuff they discussed beforehand, like the no tracker stuff, no charts and stuff like that. There was like discussion about it, but like one of the two people have to have said, well, we have to have this bailout at 12,500 hands possible. Because normally when you do this, you can just have like a buyout browse and you discuss it afterwards, depending on where you are in the hands. But then this got added in, which was really surprising to me. I think most people assume this is from like Daniel's side. He's like, well, let's have this halfway point where you can just bail out. But what surprised me the most is actually that there's no stack resetting. I'm not sure if this is actually a thing, but I haven't actually seen it in the sessions. So they have been playing deep. And even if you haven't really played much heads up and you have decent coaches and stuff like that, being deep is a totally different ballpark, right? It's a totally different game. Now, DNegs obviously with his tournament play is more like smaller stacks. Like tournament plays only early levels or like these deeper stacks. But you obviously it's full ring, you can fold a lot, and it's not that relevant at that point. But like in heads up, being deeper is going to make a massive difference. And obviously Polk is going to have a decent edge there, I think. Because even if you study up on like 100 big blinds, and then you get to 200 big blinds, sometimes even 300 big blinds, it's very hard to adjust your strategy to that if you're not fully aware of what's going on.
Yeah, it's not even really the same game, is it? Like, I mean, I've studied a little bit of deep no limit hold'em, but I've avoided it. And I tell my students to avoid it just because, like, if you want to get really good in this game, like, specialization is kind of necessary, right? So kind of got everyone to just play 100 PBs deep, to, like, only run sims and build up their, you know, their game theory solution archive with 100 big blind spots, because learning 200 or 300 deep is a bit like learning PLO and Raz and you know, Joker's Wild, Deuce to 7 as well, or whatever other games are out there. So I think it's a really interesting thing that both players have decided to play deep. I think it's possible that Negreanu actually thinks that being deeper neutralizes Polk's edge because Polk's played so much at 100 big blinds, but by the same token, Polk's the one who's studied all of the very large GTO bet sizes that come into play even more when you're super deep, and overbets and stuff, which obviously become more and more of a thing over multiple streets the deeper you get. because bringing stacks in is the main function of the overbet, bringing them into play. So I don't know. I think it's really interesting that that's happening. But let's move on a little bit to strategy now. So, quickly though, yeah, another good point you made was like who actually introduced that clause, like, that we can buy out after 12.5k hands. I would imagine that if I had to guess, it would be in there so that DNegs agreed, like he wanted a kind of a get out of jail card if he was getting absolutely smashed and didn't want to go through the psychological torture of doing it all over again. I think it's way more likely in my mind that DNegs has requested this and Doug's accepted it because Doug's just like, oh my god, this guy's offered to play me, like I'll give him this because I don't want to lose this fish sort of thing. Anyway, strategy stuff. So in the very first episode on Poker Go, which was obviously 200 hands that were played live, I kind of noticed that Negreanu was playing extremely passively. Maybe he sorted that out now, and you can comment on this in a second, but I remember a hand where, in fact it may have been the first hand of the overall match, where DNegs flopped top pair and checked behind on both the flop and the turn heads up. Now I doubt that is a thing at any frequency. It seems to me that like King X on King Rag Rag two-tone or dry is a bet a lot of the time, some of the time on the flop and the rest of the time on the turn. If there is a check, turn and flop frequency for that hand, it must be very, very, very low because of how strong that hand is and would require that you have big overbets in your river game for it to even make sense, right? So what is he doing? Why has he checked that hand back twice? Why is he checking the turn so much in general? Is he scared to get value? Does he not understand value betting? Or is this part of some exploitative long-term game plan?
So yeah, and in heads up, obviously because ranges are wider, you have to value bet thinner, which is totally opposite of what DNegs, especially in the earlier sessions, was doing. I think it's something that when they looked at Polk's game, they obviously noticed these massive overbets on the river and even turns. That Polk does because, you know, it has like some GTO thing. Because it's just like attacking your opponent's somewhat capped range, right? Yep. Your opponent never has enough hands to call there. And I think they looked at that and were like, well, what if we do the opposite and we just show up with a lot of strong hands here? Like, and we can always call this off with way more hands than we should be able to do. But obviously, in that picture, like just that part of the game tree, obviously you would be doing maybe a bit better, but you're missing a lot of value from like the average hands. And as long as this challenge keeps going longer and longer, you're just going to lose a lot of value from the smaller hands, and the smaller pots actually are more relevant, right? Yeah. Because I think in the first session as well, the 200 hands, like DNegs was up from like a few big hands at the start, and then you saw Doug Polk always grinding it up again, like small pots by small pot, and then at the end, like Doug did a bluff, and then Daniel called it, and Daniel was up, and I think that was like their game plan a little bit. But you can see that like the small pots are just more significant because you play them more often. Yeah. And we also see Daniel actually doing it with very strong hands. Because of Doug's strategy, he can just get it in with like very strong hands very often, like almost always when he wants to. He just gets stacks. And Daniel like very often shows up on the river with like a very strong hand and didn't get value from it. I think like 3 sessions ago or something, he had like quad tens in a 4-bet pot, and he only got like a pot of 25,000, so he only got like 1/3 of a stack, where he could have got a stacks, for example. Yeah. Because I even think tens were like a jam pre-flop on her big blind sleeping heads up, and he called. Obviously, flopped quads, not that bad, but yeah, I think he's just missing value, and it's going to bite him in the ass because of that in the long term.
And it's possible he's only focusing on these big pots, that he's being like certainly like myopic to some extent or blinded by the big pots when they're happening. Like he's more emotionally involved with them. He's neglecting this you know, ebb and flow of all the small pots and how crucial they are to win rate, as you say. One thing I would say about that on a technical note, like why is it like so theoretically incorrect to check back top pair for 2 streets in position and heads up? Well, unless your opponent's dramatically over bluffing the river, what's going to happen is the EV gain from betting, you know, 3 times or 2 times with top pair against your opponent's worst hands is going to be really, really significant. So when you have a king on king 8, 5, 3 deuce, let's say, and your opponent has a 5 or an 8 or pocket 6s or a 3 or ace high or whatever he decides to bluff catch with, there's going to be a very big gain by you betting both the turn and the river, you setting up that bigger pot to make the exponentially bigger river bet than it would be by checking. However, if you actually check back twice and call an overbet, you're actually not beating any of your opponent's value hands for the most part still. You're just turning your hand into a bluff catcher. And although your King X is a better call, blocking so many value hands in 2-pair and top pair, than other hands, if it's a weak king, it's still just a bluff catcher, and it's EV. The EV between calling King X and folding King X there as a percentage of, like, you know, the overall BB per 100 in the entire game based on the frequency of the spot and everything else is going to be lower when you turn it into a bluff catcher than the game would be by just value betting twice against all these commonly held second best hands. So if you want to bluff catch, you only stagnate the pot like that in GTO with hands that aren't gaining massively by building the pot. Then you call your best bluff catchers, which were hands that you had a free roll check with, right? That you didn't have to build the pot with anyway. So this is a hugely detrimental thing to do, and I'm sure his coaching team are good enough players, like strong enough players to understand that. So do they just think that Polk is maniacally over bluffing? It's not sufficient to say that because he uses GTO overbets that, you know, King X becomes a check on the flop in the turn. Like, what is he doing? What's going on here? Like,
yeah, so he actually adjusted a little bit in the later sessions where he's actually going more for king value. So he is adjusting that. So Daniel is improving in that regard. But like, I think another big issue with like not betting like your strong hands, or at least your hands that should be betting, is like because your ranges are so wide, you also want to, because you are betting thin, you can get away with more bluffs as well. But what is he doing if he now checks like these strong hands? He also has to check more no showdown hands that are just going to lose at showdown. So yeah, at one point there was like a hand where Polk was bluffing with like king high, and then Daniel called and I checked the river, and then he lost because king high bluff was actually beating Daniel's hand. Stuff like that. Yeah, and it happens. But it sucks, you know. I think he's definitely improving there, but there's still a little bit to go. It's just because he's not used to heads up, I think.
I mean, bet the turn, though. Like, if you don't bet the turn in any form of poker where stacks are deep, you create a far smaller pot than should exist. And Doug's not bombing for pot and then calling, like, third pair in the river, right? He's, like, block calling or he's check calling or something like that. So the pot is exponentially smaller if you don't bet the turn. That's something I used to talk about, like, back in the Grinders Manual, you know, my first book in 2015. If you don't bet the turn in position with the nuts when the pot needs to be built, you lose an absolute ton of EV. And I think I used some like very generic example, like we have kings, here's an overpair, don't slow play an overpair for 2 streets. But I don't know, I just found that really fascinating. I was just like, how can this coaching team be recommending that? I think more likely Daniel is misapplying like some idea about, you know, having a slightly stronger check back range in spots where it's close between maybe betting turn and not betting turn. And maybe he was taking that too far. As you say, he's now improved that a little bit. On the note of overbetting, let's go over a hand that you've actually tagged out here, Shaun, from their session. This was a hand that I saw on stream actually the other night when I was watching this. And we have Doug Polk on the button opening here. We start off the hand, we're about 125 BBs deep, I think, and Doug Polk goes ahead and opens in 200, 400 on the button, heads up from 900. Daniel calls in the big blind, and the flop comes king 7-3 rainbow. Polk then bets one third pot on the flop, is that right? Some small bet, right?
Yeah, small bet, yeah, for sure.
On the flop on king 7-3 rainbow, and Daniel makes the call. The turn is the 8 of hearts, which is the 4th rainbow card. So we have king of spades, 7 of clubs, 3 of diamonds, 8 of hearts. Completely dry, about as dry as you can get on the turn here, and Polk goes with a 1.5x pot overbet, which is a very, very good play. It's theoretically very sound because your opponent doesn't equalize the nut advantage on that turn. He would have raised against your small flop bet with many of his sets and 2 pairs and good king X and lots of draws and backdoor draws as well on king 7-3. So when he doesn't raise the flop, the 8 of hearts turn isn't really getting him out of jail here. It's making him some 2 pair, but it's by and large keeping his range capped. Meanwhile, Doug has all of the ace king, king queen, you know, pocket sevens, everything. So he overbets the turn, therefore, which should be his primary betting size, if not his only size in the spot, I believe. D-Nex makes the call, out of position, calls 1.5x pot. probably indicating his range is quite top pair heavy, second pair heavy, things of that nature. The river comes to 5 of clubs, so we have king of spades, 7 of clubs, 3 of diamonds, 8 of hearts, 5 of clubs, and Doug's bet is another very GTO qualified play, which is all in, because Doug is the one with 6-9, Daniel is not. When he check calls a big overbet out of position, Doug is the one with 6-4, Daniel is not. Doug is the one with pocket kings, pocket 7s, pocket 3s, Daniel is not. Even 8s are probably not in a big blind flattening range pre. So Daniel's super, super, super capped here, and Doug is not. At showdown, Doug shows, so D-Negs actually tanks and makes this call with king 5, I believe, right?
Yeah, he does.
And Doug is in position, rolls over the king 7. Now,
yeah.
I know you've got some opinions on this hand, which we'll get to in just a second, but I was watching the interview here after this session, and D-Negs was discussing this hand on the GG stream or whatnot, or on some other stream, and he said he gets lucky there because I river the 2-pair. If I don't river the 2-pair, there's no way in hell I'm paying him off. So basically D-Negs has just admitted to folding 95% of his range, 90% of his range to this river bet, which he can't do because you're still going to have to call, you know, what he's bet, like 4x pot here? Under 3x pot, right? So you're still going to have to call the minority of your range, but you're still going to have to defend against that sometimes, right? Like you're going to have to call like 25, 30% of your range against the sizing. So you can't just be folding 90% of it. So is D-Negs getting run over in these kind of situations? That was my question that arose from this. Obviously, this hand is a cooler. I think it's interesting that Doug goes for this big river bet, because if what D-Negs is saying is true, that he would have folded all of his naked king X, which is absurd, is Doug just running him over? And why did Doug go for such a thin value shove if that is the case? What's your verdict here, Shaun? What's going on?
Yeah, so I think first when I saw this hand being played, I was like, well, it's good for D-Negs to realize that he has to call this hand. Obviously, it's somewhat, well, I think Doug might do it with king 3, although that's a bit on the looser side. But Daniel has to call king 5. There's no way he can ever fold this. He probably has to call hands like king 6 as well, right? Because it's a really good bluff catcher in that case.
King 4,
Yeah, stuff like that, like blocking blocking Doug's nuts, right? And it's not blocking 9-10, which is like a lot of Doug Polk's bluffing range there, right?
Right.
But I think, I know I was like, okay, I give him credit that he called there, but then in the interview afterwards, he was like, well, he got lucky that I get 2 pair, else I'm not paying him off. As you said, I think it's an issue if you don't realize how these spots are played or what this means, because it's a bluff catcher, and if you give Pog the respect that he has the capability of bluffing here, you have to bluff catch.
Which Daniel does, because he's called him down in some other spots. You have to wonder, is Daniel just so out of touch with GTO here that he's basically playing and sounding like a fish in the spot?
Yeah, and this is also what I mean with Doug manages to get stacks in when he has a hand. Like D-Negs, if you reverse the position and Doug has king 5 and Daniel has king 7, Daniel is never getting the entire stack in.
Well, turn goes check, so how can he?
Yeah, maybe, we don't know. He might bet, right? But it's very unlikely that Daniel is going to get the entire stack in here. I think it's 120 big blinds in a single raise spot. It's a lot of money to go in. Without these overbet strategies, there's no way the money is going in unless the other guy is going to show aggression as well.
Yeah.
So I think this is the main edge that Doug has, just the capability of getting the hands in with the stacks in with his strong hands, right?
Yep.
And then Doug actually does this multiple times, in last session, actually 2 sessions ago, when the listener actually hears this, I don't know how many sessions ago. But Doug does this quite often. I think it's twice that the river brings a backdoor Broadway straight or something, and Doug just goes all in with this massive overbet.
Yep.
D-Negs folds twice, but D-Negs never has a straight. Maybe in one case he has the lower end, but never the nuts. If he's still thinking the way, well, I can't call without the nuts, and he's just lucky that this river came, he's just going to be massively overfolding.
Yeah, as his coach, I not have minded anything about his play, but you know, it's a bit like when a student plays a hand fine and they lose their stack, and then I say, well, elaborate on your thoughts here, what are you thinking? And then the student's like, well, and says some ridiculous thing. I'm like, well, that's the mistake, you know, that's the general kind of widespread issue in your game. So I would have jumped right on that thing he said in the post-match interview about he's lucky I hit the 2-pair, because it's a very, very fishy thing to say, in my opinion, you know, with respect. It's quite embarrassing, actually, for somebody playing a heads-up match at those stakes to be so far off where they should be, given that he has no straights, no sets really, and just a little smattering of 2-pair, like not very much 2-pair either, right? So it's quite... I'd be worried in the DNEG camp there, and if I had money on Daniel, I'd be pretty worried hearing that, and I think that is going to kill him long term unless he gets a handle on that. It's actually my personal opinion that, although I want to talk about all in EV for a second, because I think all in EV is an extremely misunderstood thing. Well, it's not misunderstood, but its significance is misunderstood, its impact and its meaningfulness is misunderstood. There was another interview with Daniel on GG's stream, at the end of GG's stream, I believe on Friday night, the night of Friday the 19th, 20th, where Daniel talks, he's talking a little bit about how, okay, yeah, I'm slightly down in the challenge now or whatever, but, you know, I'm up in all in EV, so I've got that over him, and he's sort of making a big deal in a comical way, but you can tell he's like, he thinks this is important, this all in EV thing. So what is all in EV, first of all? Well, it's the yellow line on your graph. It indicates how well you would have done if you had ran exactly, you know, bang on your EV in all in situations, but it only describes all in situations. So all in EV describes a very unique type of variance. It's a bit like talking about how lucky you've been in your life by the amount of puddles that have splashed you from cars going past. Like, I've had a very lucky life. I've only been splashed once by a puddle in the last year. Or I've had such a terrible hard life. I've been splashed by 6 puddles a day on average, or something like that. It doesn't talk about your health or how your family's health or like what's happened in your job or your career. It just talks about one aspect of variance, which on one day might seem like a really big thing. So all in EV to me is something really insignificant because it just shows one aspect of it. It doesn't show you how many sets each player has flopped, how often they've had a big pocket pair, how often they've had a bluff when they ran into a bluff catch, how often they've had a value bet when they run into a bluff catch. All of these things. So it's my belief that all in EV is massively over-dramatized, and I'd also be sitting there in the Doug Polk camp thinking, this guy cares about all in EV, and rubbing my hands together like, good, he doesn't seem to understand variance either. Now, I'm playing devil's advocate here, I'm being very, very harsh on Mr. Negreanu, but what do you think about those comments about him bringing up all in EV like this, as if it's like such a thing?
I haven't seen the interview. I'm not actually sure if he says it as a joke or not, because
maybe he does. Maybe I'm being unfair.
Yeah, because there was a guy. I'm not sure where it originated from, but I saw it on the poker subreddit, where it was like DNX being up 160,000 in all in EV or something, right? Or running 160,000 below all in EV. Mm-hmm. I know both of them actually frequent that subreddit. Doug Polk actually posts there sometimes. And I think they just saw it and maybe it's like a stab at the community or something. I don't know. I do agree with you though, like all in EV doesn't paint a full picture. If like 99% of the stack goes in when you're a huge dog, but then you get it in with like after your 1% comes on the turn, and then you get like your routes come on the turn, you get it in there with like 1% of your stack, and then you get sacked out. The all in EV is going to be way higher than actually how the money got put in, right? You got the majority of the money put in as an underdog. There's a stat called Sklansky box, which keeps in track like the EV you had for how much money went in on that street. So let's say pre-flop is like 50-50 and like 50% of the stack goes in, then 50% of that goes to your Sklansky box. It's a different thing, a bit more relevant, but we'll never know in this challenge just because there's not like full knowledge. There's no hole cards. So we'll never know who ran better. Yeah. Like it's all in EV just isn't going to be relevant.
Even Sklansky box though, it might be more accurate about the part of the variance that it describes, but it's still only describing a very small amount of the variance in the game, right? Well,
if you have all the hole cards, you can actually calculate the entire thing with Sklansky box, no? Like, you
Well,
know,
yeah, but you can't. You're still not calculating the true variance because you're not accounting for coolers, like times that one player was dealt a hand that he had to bluff. Like Sklansky Bucks, correct me if I'm wrong here, I might be, because I've just met the concept today, but would it not describe that as bad for me in Sklansky Bucks if I bluff off my stack and get called and I've got 0% equity when all the money went in? Would that not say that's a bad play if you're looking at it numerically?
yeah, true. Like that, like if you just get dealt more coolers in the sample size, it's like no stat is gonna show that.
Exactly.
Maybe you can add it on the side, like coolers given, right? The coolers won and coolers
And
lost.
then how do you define a cooler? Do you define a cooler as
Yeah.
bluffing off a stack? Because, you know, you bluff off a stack, it's the correct thing to do, but you still put all your money in with 0% equity. So I think to understand variance, you would need to have a million different lines that described all of the different setups that can happen, how good each play is in GTO. I think that's what you'd need to do. And then you'd be removing the exploitative element from the game. You'd have to like basically node lock every hand that everybody ever played against someone else with perfect info of their strategy. And it would be ridiculous. You almost need like a chess engine that can solve not just the game tree, but also how people are approaching it. So I think it's impossible, like you say, to ever get a handle on how good or bad the variance is exactly, and the only way you can do it is by playing enormous amounts of hands with the same win rate, and that's not going to happen in this challenge. So, you know, unfortunately, we're not going to know how good or bad somebody ran by looking at any stat, not all in EV, not even coolers dealt, nothing like that will tell us. And finally, you know, the icing on the cake here, if I need to like, as if there's any more evidence needed for the refutation of all in EV, would be the Galfond challenge. When Galfond was down 900k, he was down much more in EV. Right?
Yeah.
But he was running like shit. I've heard people say that all in EV is variance. It's so misguided. But anyway, I got the sense that perhaps Daniel thought that all in EV was maybe more important. And even if I'm wrong about that, like, fine. It's not, I don't know for a fact that he thinks that. But I think it's good for listeners out there just to hear like what all in EV actually is. Stop looking at that line. Remove it from your graph. We ban it in our community. Anybody mentions it, we just ban them. You know, that's the way it goes. Just kick them out for life. I exaggerate. Final point, Shaun. It's been really interesting. Thanks for coming on. The last thing I want to talk to you about is what is the deal with this? This guy's a live player. This guy's an online player. If they played live, Daniel would have a massive edge. Let's say that, for discussion's sake, Doug Polk is much, much better online, right? That he's much closer to GTO. He makes way less technical mistakes in the actions he chooses to make. Why would Daniel have suddenly this big swing in his favour live? Would he be less of a dog? Would he be a favourite? What does live actually change in your opinion? And is it exaggerated or is it under or overemphasized in the media?
I think the main reason why this exists is because normally when we consider live players versus an online player, it's just a different player pool. So when you play live games and only live games, you just play against different type of players and your skill set is a bit different. You face, like, especially lower stakes, you just play more multi-way pots and stuff like that. You have to have a different skill set. Compared to online, just because you see way more hands and so on, it's like also a different player pool, your edges are smaller and so on. But then when it's like two players that face each other, one's live and one's online, I don't think it's going to make a difference. Like, what difference is going to make just live tells? That's the only thing, right? But Doc has played a bunch of live. He has played live tournaments. He has played live high stakes. He's not going to have these huge tells that Daniel is going to be exploiting. Like,
I don't play a lot of live, but when I do, I don't get the sense that anybody is exploiting me for my live tells. I mean, I'm probably not playing against someone who's meant to be very good at, like, when I'm playing in a casino against a bunch of fish, I'm probably not playing against anyone that's like an expert at live tells. But is Daniel so amazing at live tells and Doug so hopelessly transparent that Doug's going to bluff 4x pot in the river and Daniel's going to be like, I got him, I know his face when he's bluffing, I know that little movement in his eye, I call ace high, you know, and just be crushing him? Because if that was true, the edge you could gain live would be far bigger than any edge you could have online, right? Like, if live tells were that influential, I could be like a massive winner against anybody because I'd basically be seeing their whole cards. Yeah, I think it's overdone as well. I think what should happen is that if Doug wins this match, there should be a live rematch post-COVID where they play, I don't know, a lot of footage on PokerGo and we see how well Daniel does there. I think that would be great. I sound really biased, like I want Daniel to suffer here. I just don't want him to have the excuse of, I'm a live player, not an online player. I just don't get it.
It's not an excuse he uses, though. It's like an excuse his fans use when
Right.
he's losing.
Yeah.
When you read threads like that. And I think, like, if that was the case, let's assume it's the case that live poker is totally different than online poker, even if it's the same players, then this challenge would be live. Then Daniel would have said, let's play this live. There's no way if Daniel would have an edge live that's so significant that he's going to start playing online.
Right. Absolutely. So if you're a guy out there that's like, online poker is all nonsense, you don't get the live tells, I'm a live reactive player, you're probably not. Probably just bad at the game, probably need to study. I love being controversial in podcasts. I've missed this.
Yeah, apparently,
I'm going to bring this back. I'm going to be like the new controversial guy that just like picks a side arbitrarily, plays devil's advocate, and is a total dick to that side and makes his guests defend them. That's going to be my new angle, Shaun. You've done a good job today of balancing out some of my extremely biased viewpoints in this podcast, but I can't wait, man. I can't wait to see how it unfolds. It's going to be great. We'll maybe even get you back on the show to talk about it towards the end of the challenge and see what your thoughts are then, because you seem to be doing a very good job of covering it. Have you considered a career in poker journalism?
Well, it's interesting for sure to do, but I don't think like I'm in with the crowd already. Like I don't understand enough of social media in general. Like I don't really do social media myself.
Yeah.
And to build like a profile for that, to start out there, I don't think it's like I'm obviously verbal enough. I can probably do it, but I just don't like social media enough to do it.
Yeah, but I mean, this is your second language, so I mean, I can only imagine how articulate you would be in Flemish or French or whatever you speak.
But then my viewer base is going to be really small. I speak Dutch.
Dutch, right? Okay, but it's all a mixed bag, right? Like in some places they speak one, and other places they speak another.
Yeah, I can speak Dutch, French, and English basically.
Okay, cool. All right, man. Well, thank you very much. We'll get you back on in the future. And guys at home, let us know what you think. Comments on YouTube. You can get in touch with me at admin@carrotcorner.com, or you can even go ahead and find some of my content in various places on the internet. Just do a little search for Run It Once Coach. You know, I make content here, there, and everywhere. One exciting piece of news I almost forgot is that we have a pre-flop trainer coming out on carrotcorner.com in the near future. Head over there and have a look at the Carrot Poker Trainer. We're going to be launching that very soon. Hopefully it'll be out by the time many of you are listening to this. Maybe not. But basically this program is going to be a way of drilling pre-flop GTO ranges for 6 max cash, rounding the frequencies of certain plays to the nearest 25%, and just letting you learn GTO in a way that's super applicable. I'm really stoked for it to come out. Check it out on there. All right, I'll see you guys on the next episode, which will be coming shortly, I promise. This has been Pete Clark with the Carrot Poker Podcast. Bye-bye for now.